involving labs in Ukraine, and then allow you to expand, or anyone to expand that could provide greater insight. As you're all aware, Russia has been laying out this argument for a number of months now about how there are these labs in Ukraine that are developing chemical and biological weapons, that the U.S. is involved, that they've discovered it, and they've been making that argument for a period of time, and it's the argument they usually make before they use that kind of stuff themselves against someone. So let me just start with the question of the component pieces, and then sort of allow you to expand more on the important part of it. There is a difference between a biological research facility and a biological weapons research facility, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Does Ukraine have any biological weapons research facilities?
No, let me be clear. We do not assess that Ukraine is pursuing either biological weapons or nuclear weapons, which have been some of the, basically the propaganda that Russia is putting out.
Okay, so they do have the biological research facilities. What is our government's role in their biological research programs?
So, as I understand it, Ukraine operates about a little over a dozen, essentially, biolabs, and what they are involved in is Ukraine's biodefense and their public health response, and that's essentially what they're intended to do. And I think that the U.S. government provides assistance, or at least has in the past, provide assistance really in the context of biosafety, which is something that we've done globally with a variety of different countries. So I would defer, obviously, to the details of that assistance to the agencies that are responsible.
Well, I guess that's the important component. Well, how do we define biosafety or biodefense? Is it the ability to have antidotes or responses if someone were to use an agent against you, if you were to have an outbreak? Well, what exactly is that?
Yeah, I mean, I will quickly get out of my area of expertise, but I'll give you sort of a generic answer that I understand. So it is essentially, for biodefense, you think about things like medical, for example, things that will help you to address a pandemic that is an outbreak in your country, things along those lines, things that prevent spreading of pandemics and other health issues, things along those lines. And the kinds of biosafety pieces that you would be providing assistance for are things like making sure that as you're producing medical countermeasures, that you're taking appropriate precautions, that you're letting the medical community internationally know, notifying when appropriate. So that's the kind of assistance. But I, again, just, want to be absolutely clear that we do not believe that Ukraine is pursuing biological or nuclear weapons, that we've seen no evidence of that. And frankly, this influence campaign is completely consistent with long-standing Russian efforts to accuse the United States of sponsoring weapons work in former Soviet Union. So this is a classic move by the Russians.
So I think the one thing that's piqued a lot of people's interest, and I hope we can address, is the Assistant Secretary Nuland said a couple of days ago in response to my question at another hearing. This is her quote: "The U.S. government is concerned about preventing any of these research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach," end quote. So people will hear that and say, well, that means that there must be something in these labs that's very dangerous. They possess pathogens or something that must be very dangerous. Look, we're all coming off the trauma of COVID-19, the possibility that there might have been an accident or a leak out of a lab there that we still don't know the answer to. And so it's in that context that people read that statement or hear it and say, okay, sounds to me like they have labs. These labs are working on dangerous things, and if we're worried that it's going to get out of the laboratory. How should people assess that statement? Why are we so concerned? And again, I mean, I know maybe I'm asking you some questions that regard medicine and biology and research and so forth, but it's really important for this effort to understand what exactly is in these labs that we're so worried about them getting their hands on.
Sure. I mean, I think medical facilities that I've certainly been in, and even as a child, done research, in high school type of thing, in college, all have equipment or, sort of pathogens or other things that you have to have restrictions around, because you want to make sure that they're being treated and handled appropriately. And I think that's the kind of thing that probably Victoria Nuland was describing and thinking about in the context of that. We have to be, concerned in the same way that we have to be concerned about Enohada, the nuclear power plant, or other facilities that when they're seized, and if they're seized, that there may be damage done or theft, in fact misuse some of the material that's there that's not intended for weapons purposes, but nevertheless can be used in dangerous ways or that can create challenges for the local populations.
Here in Central Florida, staffers with Senator Marco Rubio's office were in Apopka at a Ukrainian Catholic church for an outreach event, according to the senator's office. Staffers were collecting information to see if anyone needed to expedite or obtain updates on pending immigration cases, along with providing assistance from federal agencies. Senator Rubio was not at the event today, saying he is continuing to advocate for Ukrainians on Capitol Hill.
Ms. Myers, I guess I take from your testimony what you were referring to, and I sort of talked about this yesterday in an interview that I did, is so you're a country, your economy needs to be developed, you have needs. You need roads, you need this, you need that. And here comes a Chinese business subsidized by the state, offering you not just to construct the project, obviously with their workers, but to finance it. And in some cases, frankly, some cash under the table for some of the decision makers as well. And the result is, they understand China's a threat. They may not be big fans of China per se. They may be worried about what it means long term. But politically, it's tremendously beneficial to be at the ribbon cutting of this great new project that's financed. There may be a debt trap, but that'll be somebody else's problem down the road, not when they're in office anymore. And in some cases, frankly, maybe you or some of your friends got some added benefits from it. That it's hard for us to compete against that. We can't bribe government officials in some of these countries, and we don't have a system in which we can go in and create infrastructure projects and finance them if the dollars or the money that it generates doesn't justify it. In essence, it has to be a justified project. In the case of China, it seems, that's really my question, how much of this is they're willing to do projects that may not make sense from the market standpoint because it makes sense for them from a geopolitical standpoint?
It's a fantastic question. And indeed, both Evan and I and many others who are studying this particular issue are committed to trying to understand the primary motivations behind a lot of these major infrastructure projects, whether they are commercially viable or not, whether they have a very strong strategic rationale or not. But you're right. I mean, in many of these cases, especially, for example, the La Union port in El Salvador, right, is a perfect example where it's not a commercially viable project and would very much seem to be of interest to China for strategic reasons. So how does one compete with that, right? Especially when it's of interest to whatever government in power, and there may be kickbacks involved, and China's speed involved, and something to announce to an electorate, perhaps in advance of the next presidential election. It's a very, very challenging thing to do. What can the U.S. do in this particular instance? I mean, we can work, probably not necessarily in El Salvador, but in a lot of countries to on capacity building, on ensuring accountability, on ensuring